Hello, fellow detectives. Welcome to Unlocked, the official podcast for all things Nancy Drew by Her Interactive. I am your host, Tammy Tuckey, and this week we welcome on the show Jeff Pierce, our own voiceover artist from a couple of games, to the show. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you on the show because we usually have a couple guests who've only done one or two voices, but you've done a whopping 3, so look at you. You get lucky.
I did. I got very lucky. I was amazed when it all happened. So,
were you introduced to Nancy when you were younger, like way before the games? Did you read the books, or what was your introduction to Nancy?
My introduction to Nancy Drew was Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boy TV show.
Look at that.
Yeah, that was a long time ago, back in the late 70s, early 80s, I think it was.
Wow.
If even earlier than that. But yeah, and then some of the books. But then I'd been disconnected from it for years and years and years until 2013 when these came along.
So had you played the games before going in for an audition, or was the introduction to the games basically the audition?
No, it was actually, I'm living out here in Seattle, and we have an organization that posts auditions, and I had just moved to Seattle, and I was looking for just theater and voiceover work, and happened to cross an audition for a voiceover, and it didn't say what it was, and I responded to it, and they asked me if I'd be willing to come in and read for them a little bit, and I did, and that resulted in the 3 games that I did for them. So
let's start out with Ghost of Thornton Hall, because you are the voice of Wade. This is an interesting character in of itself. So what was the description given to you of Wade initially before you grabbed that voice character, grabbed the voice for that specific character?
Well, Wade was from the South, and they kind of give me a general region of where he was from. And the casting guy in charge of casting at that time, Nick Blahunka, he just gave me a rough idea of what kind of character, that he was kind of a gruff character. Showed me some of the rough sketches of what this guy was going to look like. But we essentially built it from there. And then it was, he gave me the script to read through about a week before we went into the studio. And I kind of gave him some ideas of what I thought he was going to sound like, and he gave me a yes or no, and we kind of settled on what Wade was, the voice for Wade at that point. And he just absolutely we had a great time in the studio recording it, because we just had a lot of fun. The way that he did his recording was try it this way, try it that way, and we just did it several times until he said, yeah, that's the one, let's move on. And so it was just a lot of fun finding that character. And it was so dark, so much darker, I felt, than any of the other characters, the other 2 characters that I got to play. And it was something that I don't normally get to do when I'm doing any performing. I don't play the dark characters. I usually play the more either the short leading man, or I play the comic relief. So to play something dark and brooding was a little bit more interesting and a lot of fun. So I had a great time doing that one.
His character in particular is not a black or white character, and he has all these fond memories of Thornton Hall itself and of being with his family, but also he has this, backstory of he's been in jail before. There have been a lot of deaths at Thornton Hall, so in particular, that's kind of you got to get to a dark space. He seems very gruff on the outside, but he seems like he has a tender soul underneath, so it's hard. I guess it would be hard to play something like that just with a voice.
Well, and I mean, it's interesting because when I went in for the reading to actually do the recording, they don't give you a lot of that information. All you have is the script, so you don't know a lot of other things that are going to be going on in the game throughout. And then some of the things they throw out, some of the voiceover work that we did ended up on the cutting room floor. So.
With more detail about him?
Oh, yeah. Well, of course. With more detail that they ended up not using in the game.
Keeping it a
because
little
they
bit
didn't
more
see.
suspenseful, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So there's other things that went on with that, with all the characters. I mean, but that's typical, is that they're going to run into things that are dead ends. They just record everything, and like a movie, they cut out what ends up not being used. So, I mean, there was a lot going on with that character, and a lot of, I mean, several hours spent in the studio recording the voiceover work for that one, for all three of them actually. That led to the character that ended up being in the game. And he had a lot of depth to him, which was something that, in a video game, to me, I grew up in the Pac-Man and Tetris generation, so I'm not gonna. So depth in a video game still to this day is just amazing to me. Having characters that actually are well-rounded is just amazing for me to be able to wrap my brain around. And I haven't played the game since it first came out. I loaned it to some friends, and it's still being passed around the Western United States, where my friends are all
That's
playing
awesome,
it.
though.
So it's great. But I every time I see clips of it or anything, I still can't believe I hear my voice coming out of that character.
So after the first game that you got to work on, did you want to check out the older Nancy Drew games just to see how they have changed over the years, or how they're usually structured, just to get a sense of, okay, so this is kind of how they go about doing it? Because you must have been thrown into a situation where it's like you only get so much information, so you can't really pair everything together until you actually play the game. So
Absolutely.
To see something complete, have you done that before? Or
and when we realized what it was, because my son, I have a teenage son, and when we found out what I was going to be doing, my son is very much into video games and very much into that type of problem-solving video game.
Mm-hmm.
So when he found out that I was going to be doing a Nancy Drew, and we started doing some research into it, then he absolutely wanted to play the game. So we were able to go online and play the games a little bit, and he got really interested and excited about it. And he told me that he couldn't even imagine me doing something like that, being part of a video game like that, until the game finally came out. So we did play some games before we went into it, or before I walked into that game, and then afterwards, played my game through several times, or played Ghost of Thornton Hall several times through, and he has to find all the cheats and be able to figure out the way to get through it. But then it has not become about, at least for my son, it has not become about me being in the game. It's become about the game. So he's just has a good time doing that. And I just, not being a big video gamer, I just don't usually go back and play them again. But now I'm trying to find out who has my video games, because ever since we were talking about doing this interview, I wanted to get them back and be able to play them again. But everybody that I've lent them to is still playing them. So I'm not able to get them back until probably the summer. So, and I haven't even played Labyrinth of Lies. I haven't even had the opportunity. So.
Well, and another thing with that, I just want to go back to Thornton Hall. It
Sure.
seems like there's a couple different ways that the game can end, but the one that I found was the most happy was that that Wade is offered a position. Wade is basically offered a position, keeping involved with the family and the company. So, and it seems like there's like those, little clips or little photos of what the characters are doing afterwards, like that Nancy kind of sums up. And I'm like, good for Wade. He actually got a happy ending. You know what I mean? So
It's true. Oh, absolutely.
When you click the right one, but it's like, I was just so happy for him, because it just seemed like he was, when you have that skeleton in your closet of the past, it always comes back, but it seems like he's lucky. He gets to be on a different path, which is what is always a good thing. You want the character to grow.
Oh, definitely. And get into someplace different than he was when he started. So, yeah, definitely.
Yes.
To see him grow at the end of it. I mean, it would be, you kind of get to the end of it, at least for me, I get to the end and I see it and I go, oh, well now I want to see where he goes next. And, so always waiting for the sequel to Thornton Hall, what's going to come next for Wade and for that group. But I realize that, these games don't do that. So I guess we're just making it up in our own heads. So but that was a lot of fun. It was going through that character and seeing him grow and build and seeing his character deepen throughout. So I really enjoyed working on that one.
And then moving on to the Silent Spy, like these games are I feel a little bit more darker in tone, but the Silent Spy has references to Nancy's mother. Now your character, Alec, he apparently was somebody who was investigating the car crash that Nancy's mother was involved in, and then he was kind of told to stop investigating and seeing what in the world was going on, which just sounds so creepy. So the fact that Alec gets to meet Nancy in the game and work one-on-one. Now, I found it like when I first met the character when I played the game, I was like, who is this? Is this a bad guy? Is this a good guy? I can't really tell. And I guess you can't really tell throughout the whole game until you get to the end. So were you purposely playing it that way?
Again, I mean, it's a huge credit to the writer and who also did the casting, that you never quite knew if you were the good guy or the bad guy throughout. He led it so well and wrote it in such a so masterfully that you never kind of got the idea if you were good or bad. And throughout that game, for me, I always thought myself as the good guy throughout. But then again, I tend to think of myself as the good guy in everything. But then when I started playing the game, actually playing it and learning, oh, wait a minute, this guy goes a lot of different directions that I had never anticipated. And then I think that's one of the great things that they do with the Nancy Drew games by Her Interactive is they really take you on a trip that you never know exactly what kind of with the character that you're speaking with or working with, if they're trustworthy or not, if they have altruistic motives. And that's one of the things that I got from Alec is for one moment you thought that you could trust him and the next moment you didn't. So yeah, I never knew throughout what kind of character he was going to be. I just, I did a huge credit again to Nick LaHunka for the way that he wrote it, the entirety of all these games, that it was just so up in the air about how this was going to end up. And Silent Spy was no exception. I mean, Alec was scary and endearing at the same time, a lot. So
you can't judge a book by its cover, basically, is what we kind of go off of with each character. So when we kind of find out that Alec has been looking for his sister, who it seems like her name is Grace, and that it seems like she might have been kidnapped so he wouldn't investigate further from a different a group of spies, like that's scary. That's even if it were to happen to somebody else, it's like you understand the reasoning behind why he's doing what he's doing, because it's for a family member. So when he kind of tells Nancy that and we find that out, it's like, okay, that's another reason as to why he is not exactly working directly with Nancy, but then again, it helps him in the long run because it seems like he might be able to find his sister towards the end of the game, which is a good thing too. But that really creeped me out because I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, that's the worst part of being a spy is like if you have any close ones, they're the ones that are in the crossfire, I guess.
Absolutely,
right?
And yeah, and again, no exception in this game. You never quite know why anybody is doing anything until the end of the game, and in this case, it was Grace for Alec, and looking out for themselves. I mean, everybody has motives, but you never quite get down to the deepest part of their motives until late in the game, when you learn that so much of it is about protecting their family. And I mean, there's so many twists and turns in these games that I just absolutely adore. And going back to family, protecting your family, that's huge in video games, unbelievably these days, and film and television. I mean, it's so much of it is about. I was listening to something about The Sopranos last night about how much that show was about family, and again, this one's no exception. I mean, it's all about all the darkest motives and protecting your family. So
with that being said, would you ever consider being a spy?
Well, who's to say that I'm not right now? So
this is true. I think a lot of the fans were also kind of surprised to see that Nancy's mom was brought into play with the game. So you only have like maybe a couple of segments that you get to talk about her, but what was the discussion about it behind the scenes about her specific character, Kate? Did they go into anything like that?
Very, very little. I mean, it was kind of an honor to be dealing with the character of Kate. But there, again, because when you're in the studio, there's not a lot of talk about past in regards to the character. He kind of gives you the casting director kind of gave you a tone and had you read it several times, but he never gave you much information. I mean, I knew that Kate was Nancy's mother, but nothing much more than that. So throughout, he just had you read it different ways and emphasizing certain words and emphasizing certain phrases. And then when you saw the entirety of the game, you saw what he had sculpted. It's really sculpting with voice, what he was doing. I mean, tremendously skilled in the way that he did it, because he knew the outcome of the game. He knew the direction everybody had to go, and took us all that direction without giving us a lot of information. And I don't know if that was purposeful or not. Maybe he didn't want us to know the outcome, or maybe he and the voiceover artist playing Nancy knew the outcome, but not anyone else associated with the game until the game finally hit store shelves. So, and that was one of the things that I think actually that the casting director, the script writer actually wanted. I think now that I'm thinking about it, he probably didn't want us to know what was going on in the game. He wanted us to bring ourselves to it, and then he would give us a little bit of direction, but he didn't want to lay down a very strict way to proceed through the game, way to approach this character. He wanted us to really bring ourselves to it. And there was a lot of just go for it and play when we were in the studio, to the point of, don't feel like you have to stick exactly to the script. And so I mean, at least for me, I got to make up some of the things that were coming out of my mouth, or coming out of Alec and Wade's mouth. So that was interesting in that I didn't feel like I was bound to the words on the page. He gave me some leeway to try things out. And, and we would record several different versions of it, and then he would let me know if he got what he wanted. And I mean, it's really interesting going back and listening to the game itself, because there's so much chopping up of the things that I said in different takes. So you
can tell.
One take
you can tell like it's
absolutely.
A different take.
I can hear it. It's like, I can say I didn't say that with that line. I said it with this line. And I mean, I have the script somewhere. So I mean, when I was watching the game, I remembered, what was being said, or I can go back and grab the script and say, no, I didn't say it that way. That one got cut in with this other take that we did.
Wow.
To create what finally came out in the game. So it's really amazing to see what actually made it into the game when it was all finished. And I don't know how much of what we did in the studio, and I can't speak for everybody who did the voiceover work, but I can speak for myself, how much what we did in the studio influenced what happened in the game, even though it had been written before we walked into the studio.
Ooh, I like that idea. So maybe it influenced the end game, like who the culprit was.
It could have been. It could have changed who the culprit was. It could have changed the path on how they got there, or influenced somebody's character and what other items were brought into that character throughout. It could have been. I don't know, but I do know that. Yeah, we recorded several different versions of it, and he let me play a lot when I was in the studio. So,
and then, with Alec, his hometown is basically Scotland. So, what was your, how did you jump in to get that accent?
I had done a show about maybe a year and a half earlier that was set in Scotland, and so I had done a lot of voice work in that show. Regarding different regions of Scotland, because in that show we traveled around Scotland. There's a show called The 39 Steps. And so I had already done a lot of that, but it was a matter of listening to a lot of of television that was done in Scotland and film that was done in Scotland, and I have dialect tapes and dialect books about how to get the dialect. But different regions, just like in the United States, everybody's speaking, well, for the most part, everybody's speaking English, but there are different regions of the United States, and everybody sounds a little bit different. I've been told I have a California dialect because I was born and raised in California. But I live in the Pacific Northwest, but every once in a while folks can tell that I'm not from the Pacific Northwest. And this is the same thing with Scotland. Glasgow is very different from Edinburgh. And since being married to my wife, now I hear a lot more of that when I'm traveling or when I talk to friends that are from Scotland. But the dialect that I felt that I did in Silent Spy is a lot more general. Wade is a little bit more specific to that region of the United States, but still Alabama is going to be different from Atlanta, is going to be different from Louisiana. And it's a very general dialect for that area.
We kind of jump over to the next game in Labyrinth of Lies, and Grigor basically is one of those characters where I feel he's just in the wrong place at the wrong time. I thought it was like just a smart Alec character, but then finding out his background, I was like, ooh, well then, okay. So yeah, he has had a really tough life, especially when you're in the foster system. How were you given that information about his character in the initial conversation about it? Because it just seems like his character in particular, I think out of all the characters in this game, has the most going on behind in their background.
And the answer to your question is absolutely zero. We were given nothing about these characters. We were just handed a script very shortly before we did the audio work, and this one was done very differently than the other two, in that for the majority of the recording we were all in the room at the same time. It was me and all of the characters except Nancy, and we were put in a studio at the same time and just told to stick to the script, and then at certain times they would he would just say, okay, now just ad lib. And we would start a conversation based on the script and veer off from there. So this one really kind of gives me the idea that the audio performers led what happened throughout the story. And we really developed our own characters ourselves. But so much of what happened in that was we didn't have any information. We were told that we were performers, and essentially that was it.
That's really unusual, though, to have all of you in the same studio. I've never heard of that. I've never heard of that.
And I had never done it. I'd never done anything like that before, where they told us that we were all going to be in there at the same time. Now, it was the most fun I'd ever had in a audio studio before.
I can only imagine, though.
Yeah, because I mean, we were there for several hours just playing, and they finally, there was the one when we went back the most times, because then they would want to get a little bit of 2 characters together or 3 characters together. But the first initial trip to the studio was everybody in the studio at the same time on a mic, and just talk. And it's so hard to do an ad lib situation with that kind of in that arena, because we're all trying to talk over each other. So it's to make sure that, okay, this person has done talking and now I'm going to ad lib, but I don't want to talk over anybody else. So there's always that we're very tentative, but at the same time we have to be very fluid. And it was amazing fun and completely strange, because we didn't know what we were doing. We had no idea what was going on with this story. And 1 minute they wanted us talking in a very character voice, and the next minute they wanted us to be very human, and never got a lot of the story. And again, to this day, I've never played this game, so I don't have a lot of information about what happened with this character because of the way that they recorded it with us. Because, I mean, very much like a movie, everything's recorded out of order and we're doing bits and pieces throughout. You never really knew what was going on in the game. I mean, my understanding when we were recording it it was a performance. That these were actors and this was just a performance. And that's all I knew of the game. So when I went in for the audition for this one, all they wanted was this very character voice. We just want you to do a character voice for us. And we want to hear what that is. And we want it to be very, Zeus, king of the gods. And so that's what I did for them. And that was it. And then when we finally went into the studio, they said, okay, this is that character voice. And the rest of it is just you. There's no dialect. There's nothing else. And we recorded everything out of order. So we never knew exactly what was going on. And up until this very moment, still don't. I guess because not having an opportunity to play the game, still don't have much of an idea of what went down in that game. I'm really interested to see how it ended. I mean, I'm looking forward to the time that I finally get to play this game.
Because I had a couple questions about what your reaction would be to. No, it's fine. I don't want to ruin it for you, honestly. But let's just say your character might not have the happiest of endings, and I think Nancy feels bad for him in that retrospect, and I do too, because I'm like, oh, come on. But you'll understand it once you get a chance to play. But you have to let me know what you think.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely will. But,
well, what else have you been up to then since that we could, let our listeners know about?
Well, I mean, I've done theater in the Seattle area. I used to be a professional actor here in Seattle, and then I stepped back from doing that. I have a family. I got married last year. I bought a house a couple of days ago. I have a teenage son, and just trying to make sure that I can continue living in Seattle. But I've done some theater work here in the Seattle area. I've done working for companies such like Green Stage doing outdoor Shakespeare. I'm a huge fan of Shakespeare, so I want to do more and more of that. My wife is the same way. But it's primarily doing theater here in the Seattle area, and not at the big companies here in Seattle, but some of the smaller fringe companies. Because I'm a full-time loan officer for a credit union, and I manage a theater at a local high school. So there's other work that I have to do to be able to stay living here. And I mean, a lot of the actors that work here in this area do that very thing. I mean, so many folks with Amazon and Microsoft and Apple all being here, we all have other jobs that we do during the day, and then we have our rehearsals and performances in the evening, doing theater and film. But I mean, or doing theater and theater. That's what I'm doing right now. I mean, I did a show last year. I'm trying to figure out if I want to find time to do a show this year. But as I said, I bought a house 2 days ago. So I'm really, at this point, this year, I'm thinking about settling into just getting into my house. Although I'm thinking about doing theater this summer, maybe, trying to do some outdoor Shakespeare. And then definitely by the end of the year, getting a reel together and getting it out there so I can start doing some voiceover work again.
And on that note, I have to say, if you could describe your experience working with Her Interactive and then being a part of the Nancy Drew universe using one word, what would that be? It
would be fun. Because that was the one thing that just stuck out to me through all of the voiceover work that I've done in the past. It was going into the studio and just having fun.